Hello everyone, Mr. Moomaw here, welcoming you back to another episode of U.S. History. Hello Oceanside Collegiate Academy. Today we're going to be talking about the market revolution. We're going to be talking about very important changes that happened in the economy of the United States during the period really between the 1790s going into the 1830s. The economy of the United States changes dramatically during that time, and we're going to talk about why and how. To begin with, we talked about that proclamation line in relation to the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. It is a dead letter. People are pouring across the Appalachian Mountains. We talked about the defeat of Tecumseh, defeat of the Red Sticks. This Indian land is opening up. The United States has conquered, defeated, and displaced these people. Their land's opening up. People are pouring across the Appalachian Mountains to settle it. As you can see, the U.S. population is growing and growing and growing and growing to the point where in 1990 you have almost 275 million people. 1820 you got about 5. Population just grows and grows and grows and grows. People are having big families. People are immigrating. America is one of the few places in the world where there's just all this land available. The United States government goes in, the Indians are driven off, they send in those surveyors, people like Washington was, and they divide up the land and they parcel it out and they file everything at the land office. And if you want to buy land, you go down to the land office, you look at a map, you pick your spot, you pay your money, going rate of about $2 an acre. It's sold in 640 acre and 320 acre lots. 640 acres is a square mile, which means your property is 1 mile by 1 mile on each side like a square. And then you have to put a certain amount down, and you can usually pay in installments for the rest. And once that's done, though, it's yours. It's your land. Nowhere else on earth. Everybody else on earth, you rent land, or you have some landlord or some master or something like that. In America, it's wide open. You can move out there, buy your land, and do whatever you want. It represents the single greatest span of economic opportunity in history. It comes at the expense of the defeat and removal of an entire people. But one person's loss, someone else's gain, as is true of most of history. But just understand that about why people are moving west, why the population grows so much. There are no other opportunities on earth like this. However, it doesn't go smoothly initially. For one thing, those Appalachian Mountains do represent a significant barrier. We're used to being able to drive over them or through them. There are tunnels, and we used to be able to fly over them, take a train, whatever. Or at the very least, pick up a phone and call somebody on the other side of the mountains, or someone very far away. That's not the case at this point. All communication, all movement of goods is physical, driven by human power or animal power or the wind. That's about it. So if you're on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, if you're in the uplands, you're far away from the East Coast, you inhabit a very different world, a world that in many ways is cut off from that. One of the ways this manifests itself initially is the Whiskey Rebellion. Alexander Hamilton, in his capacity as Secretary of the Treasury, advocates and gets a tax placed on whiskey production in western Pennsylvania. Well, it's everywhere, but western Pennsylvania is where it mostly affects people. The problem is, people out there, they grow corn up in the mountains and hills and everything like that. Transporting the corn, though, is a problem because corn is a very bulky product. It's not heavy so much as just bulky. It takes up a lot of space. And the only way to get it from place to place is to put it in a wagon, which means you have to hitch animals up to it and pull it over there. And you can only put so many animals on a wagon before it becomes just really hard to move. So you have to have multiple wagons for large amounts of corn, and it's just very expensive to transport over land. Labor, distance mean money. It's much, much cheaper, much more economical to turn your corn into whiskey and just send the whiskey. Whiskey takes up less space. But when Hamilton slaps a tax on that, these farmers out there in the West really resent this. As far as they're concerned, people back east are hitting them in their economic interest. Well, it's in the economic interest of people in the East, it's not in their economic interest. In other words, we inhabit one economic zone, they inhabit another. They're doing things that benefit them and do not benefit us. So what's in this system for us? So in 1791, you get the Whiskey Rebellion. People show up there to collect taxes. They get beaten up. Beating up tax collectors, as we've established, is a long-standing American tradition. Hamilton, though, does not approve of this. He doesn't like mob violence anyway, and he especially doesn't like mob violence when it's directed toward policies he has put in place. As far as he's concerned, we fought a revolution, we got a decent government, and if that decent government wants to tax you, you better pay it, and if you don't, the army's coming to get you. Washington, as president, calls up an army of 20,000 men with Hamilton at his side. They march off to western Pennsylvania. The rebellion dies out. People obviously aren't going to fight an army of 20,000 guys that were paying tax on whiskey. Nonetheless, though, the problem is there. The people out in the West, people in the Appalachian region and beyond, don't feel any kind of economic connection with the East. And there are people waiting in the wings to exploit that, like Hamilton's old nemesis, Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr, ever since he shot Hamilton, his career's kind of been in the toilet. So Burr goes out west to try to reinvent himself. And he goes up and down the frontier making friends, and he notices that people out there on the frontier on the other side of the Appalachians, they really don't like the people back east. Well, once you get that Louisiana Purchase in 1803, you now have the economic gravity of the western part of the Appalachians shifting to the Mississippi River Valley. Now everything moves this way, so we go down the Mississippi and out. So Burr, in his mind, starts kind of hatching this plan. The exact nature of the plan is never entirely laid out. But what it seems like Burr was up to was, he was going to raise his own private militia. He was going to get a U.S. Army general, a guy named James Wilkinson, to back him. They were going to invade what was today Texas, which is part of, the time was part of New Spain. They're going to take over Texas, and then they're going to detach Louisiana and a large part of the western United States, build a new empire, with Texas on one side, half the United States on the other side, Louisiana in the middle, with Burr as emperor right there in the middle, governing from New Orleans. In other words, Burr's basically kind of like a supervillain trying to make his own country and take over. The plan didn't get very far. Wilkinson, who was kind of sneaky anyway, got cold feet and went to Jefferson and confessed that he didn't blame himself, of course, but he blamed Burr. Burr gets arrested, put on trial for treason. They can't prove anything, so Burr gets off. Nonetheless, the fact that there was that very real possibility of people in the West just sort of saying, nuts to you guys, we're going to make our own country with Burr as our emperor. Remember, this is the age of Napoleon. It's not out of the bounds of reason for Burr to think he can be the emperor. This really makes people worry. What stops the United States from really falling apart like this is the fact that right when this is happening, as the United States is becoming this big country, that big enemy that a big country has, distance, is being conquered. It's being conquered, first of all, by economic need and by the inventions that come out of that enable America to be more tightly knit together. Because the age of Burr conspiracy is also the height of, or one of the heights of, I guess you could say, Industrial Revolution has a lot of heights, the Industrial Revolution. Way back in the 1760s, going into the 1770s, an instrument maker named James Watt, by instrument maker I mean James Watt makes scientific instruments, and he has to make them by hand, which means he has to be a very precise and detailed mechanic. When you're making calipers or clocks or something like that, and you're able to make those little parts by hand, you have to be very precise. But James Watt is a talented engineer and a talented maker of machines. James Watt is tinkering with this idea of a steam engine. He's not the guy who comes up with the idea. It actually goes way, way back in time, all the way to a guy named Heron of Alexandria. Seen here in this picture here. This is Heron of Alexandria's steam engine. It's basically a bronze ball with these two nozzles full of water. And the water's right here. When you heat the water turns into steam. Steam goes up here into this ball, and the steam has to escape. It escapes through these nozzles, and because the nozzles are pointed in opposite directions, it makes it spin. That's a steam engine. Now, for Heron of Alexandria, it was basically a toy. But Watt sees the potential in this. Watt sees that you can use this to move things. So Watt, and there's other people along with him, a guy named Michael Bolton and some other people, he's not the only one to invent the steam engine. And one thing about inventions that you'll see throughout history is that while one guy will get the credit, he's usually at the tail end of a lot of other people developing things. Want to see that in action? Look who invented television. You'll get 50 different names if you look that up, because this guy invented this, and this guy made it a little better, and this guy made it a little better. who's to say who actually invented it? So James Watt did not pull the idea of steam engine just out of nowhere. There were already people working on this. There already were steam engines. James Watt, you can say, invented the first practical steam engine, a machine that harnesses the power of steam to create motion, to create force. There's your boiler. You put water in it. Have some flammable material there to boil the water. Once the water's boiling, it turns into steam. That steam gets fed into pipes. Those pipes move down here to work pistons. The pistons turn wheels, and the wheels can move whatever you want them to move. The steam engine represents a revolution in human technology on the scale of the discovery of how to build fire. For the first time, human beings have a reliable, artificial source of power. They're not dependent on muscle. They're not dependent on the forces of nature. They can build one of these and create their own power wherever they want. As long as you have water and some means to boil it, you have power. This steam engine will revolutionize human life. This steam engine kicks off the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution being this process by which human and animal labor is replaced by machine labor. This, by the way, is coal. You can use wood to boil the water, but it's not as efficient as coal. Coal is usually the most energy for your, basically your efforts. Coal is basically fossilized plants and animals that have been compacted over time. You can actually see the leaves, the impression of leaves in this. Hundreds of millions of years old, and you toss it in a fire. But that's what coal is. So coal is very important. Coal mines are very important. Britain, because it has a lot of coal, because it has a sophisticated economy, because it has banks where people can get loans to start businesses and invest in this new technology, Britain takes the lead in the Industrial Revolution. The United States plays catch up, but the United States will very quickly overtake Britain, as we'll see. Now, the first impact the Industrial Revolution has is on the textile industry, on the cloth industry. People invent a series of machines, water loom, spinning jenny, mule, all that stuff, to be able to produce cloth en masse. And as people are able to produce cloth en masse, you're producing wool and other things, but the big new thing is producing cotton cloth. Wool is extremely difficult to clean. It's way before dry cleaners. So if you want to clean wool, you basically have to soak it in urine, essentially. And wool, because it's an animal fiber, is always going to have a little bit of greasiness to it. Dirt sticks to it very easily. Wool is hard to keep clean and maintain. Cotton is very easy to keep clean and maintain. It's a vegetable fiber. Turning cotton into cloth, though, used to be a very labor-intensive process. However, with machines, all of a sudden that labor-intensive process becomes much, much less, which makes cotton much, much cheaper, which means it's more available to people. Now, the real problem here, though, is sourcing. Where do you get the cotton in the first place? Cotton grows in lots of places in the world. In America, it's mostly grown on the coast and in very limited supplies. Sea island cotton is there, but only grows really near the coast. Now, you can grow cotton further inland, the short staple cotton. The problem with that is, though, that cotton has these big seeds in it. And in order to clean it so you can process it from machines, you actually have to go in and pull all the seeds out. And by you, I mean your slaves. And it's just not really economical to do that. You could have your slave doing something that's going to earn you way more money than sitting there all day picking little seeds out of these cotton bolls. Well, along comes this guy, Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney comes up with a very, very simple machine. He's an inventor from Connecticut. He visits down in Georgia. He sees cotton production. He wonders how he can help it along. And Eli Whitney invents something called the cotton engine, or cotton gin. Cotton gin is basically just a box. It has this cylinder in it. And the cylinder's got all these little hooks on it. And you feed cotton into it, and you turn the crank, and the hooks basically just pull the fibers apart. Seeds just drop out, and you've got the clean cotton. You can make big industrial versions of this that are steam powered. You just dump cotton in, it just spins and spins and spins and rips the cotton apart and pulls it back, and pulls all the seeds out and everything. And what one man could do in a day, now it does work with basically 25 people. And that's the early versions. It gets more sophisticated. Well, Whitney doesn't make much money off this because it's so easy to build, everybody just builds their own. And when they start building big industrial versions of it, well, he doesn't really get anything off that either. Nonetheless, though, this now makes it possible to supply large amounts of cotton to these British textile mills. What does this do for the economy, especially in the South, plantation economy? It shifts from what they were doing before, tobacco, rice, indigo, stuff like that. It shifts now to cotton production. At the exact same time this is going on, remember, Eli Whitney's inventing this in the early 1800s. By 1812, 1813, 1814, Andrew Jackson is pushing the Creeks off their land. The Creeks in the Deep South control some of the best cotton growing land on earth. And once they're gone, all these people move in. They set up plantations, they plant cotton, they grow the cotton, harvest the cotton, gin the cotton, and send it off to England and make a lot of money. Cotton very rapidly becomes America's leading export. Cotton production is very valuable, which means slaves are very valuable, which means slavery is very important, which means unlike the dreams of some of the founding fathers that would just die out, it's going nowhere. Now, Eli Whitney, I put that in here. Eli Whitney does come up with something else too, by the way. Let me go back to that. I don't really want to call it an invention because it's more of a, I guess you'd call it a process, an invention. Eli Whitney comes up with this idea. He calls it the American system of manufacturing. Because I've got something else on the sheet called American system, we'll just call it interchangeable parts. In the Revolutionary War, if you're a guy, you want a musket, right? You go down to the gunsmith and you tell him you want a musket, and he makes you a musket. He carves the stock, he drills out the barrel, he polishes everything, he builds the trigger lock and everything by hand, tapping it out with a hammer, and he gives you your gun. It's very labor intensive, which means it's expensive. If something breaks on it, you can't just go to the local gunsmith and buy a part off the shelf and screw it in yourself. Somebody has to tap one out and put it in place. Labor intensive, expensive. Eli Whitney comes up with a process by which you can produce parts en masse with machine tools. In other words, machines that make parts for other machines. Instead of just having a guy tap out triggers, you could stamp them out of solid metal with machines using these steam engines over and over again. All the triggers are identical, all the locks are identical, all the stocks are identical. Everything is the same, produced by a machine. Cuts down on human labor enormously, which reduces cost, which makes these things far more available. Now, this is key for what the main thing we're going to be talking about here, which is the market economy. I haven't given it a name yet. It's one of your first terms. I should have probably introduced the actual word before. But all this is key for the market economy. America is transitioning at this point from a subsistence economy, which is to say an economy by which people produce most of the things they use, or just get them from neighbors or something like that, to an economy where people purchase things with cash, where people expect to be paid in cash wages. An economy where most of the activity is buying and selling rather than producing. You'll see a lot of different definitions for market economy. That's the one for our purposes that we're going with here. Sorry, I should have kind of given a more precise definition earlier, but that's what a market economy is. So if you haven't had that on your sheet yet, go back a few and there it is. All right. So all this is key. Cheap, mass-produced parts, produced by machine tools, cheap, mass-produced clothes like that. Women don't have to sit there all day long and spin out thread. They can just go down to the store and buy cloth. They can go down to the store and buy thread. They can buy whatever they want. Now, the other key factor here is not just in production, but in distribution of goods. How is stuff going to get places? Well, enter our friend who we already have seen before, Henry Clay. Henry Clay, when he's not starting wars, has other ideas for America. Henry Clay has something he calls his American system. Clay believes that distance is a big problem. He knows that these people on the other side of the Appalachians feel economically disconnected from the rest of America, and he wants to solve that. Not only does he want to solve it, he wants to knit the American economy together, where everybody feels like they have a shared economic destiny. Henry Clay is a nationalist. Henry Clay wants America to expand. Not this region or that region, not his own home state at the expense of everyone else. He wants America to get better. And to do that, he needs to tie America together. Now, his American system is based on three principles. First, you have tariffs. You want to charge an import tax on manufactured goods from other countries to encourage American domestic manufacturing. In other words, you put a tax on clocks coming in so people will buy American clocks, which gives Americans jobs. Tariffs are how the American government, tariffs and land sales, are how American government funds itself basically throughout most of early history. He also wants a bank. Alexander Hamilton established a bank, first bank in the United States. That bank died out when its charter died out. Henry Clay gets a new bank, the second bank in the United States, that serves as America's national bank. In other words, it's the bank that loans money to other banks, which helps keep the currency stable, which means people trust the money. which means you can put more money in circulation. Out west, a lot of things stood in the place of money. Receipts from cotton warehouses, for example. I would have 100 bales of cotton stored in this warehouse. I get a receipt, 100 bales of cotton. If I want to buy something off someone, I can give him my receipt. Now that cotton is his. He can go down there and get the 100 bales of cotton, or he can trade it to someone else for something he wants. So that receipt essentially functions as currency. All kinds of things function as currency. In the way in the woods, cowbells and hatchets are currency, because you need cowbells because else you're going to find your cow in the woods, and hatchets, of course, because you need that for everything. And last, infrastructure. Henry Clay wants to physically tie America together, not just the economic, but I mean, you have to have a way to move stuff around. And that means infrastructure. That means conquering distance with roads, with canals, and ultimately with railroads. Now, Clay is a big supporter of these kind of public-private partnerships, which is to say, a venture that attracts private investors but also gets government money to one degree or another. And the idea is to build roads. The type of road he's talking about is something called a macadam road. In Scotland, a guy named MacAdam he actually did research. There's a real interesting part in Paul Johnson's Birth of the Modern, where he talks about how modern roads came to be designed. I know you don't think, oh, roads, that's boring. Roads aren't cool history. I think it's pretty interesting, actually. He went out and actually looked at roads that were built. The oldest roads in Britain are from Roman times, the big cut stone roads. And he noticed that the cut stone roads over time, the dirt would kind of erode underneath them and the stones would kind of stick up and a horse had to lift up higher to get over it and stuff like that. He actually measured all kinds of things, how high a horse had to lift his hoof on this kind of road, how uneven it was and all this. And doing experiments and a bunch of other stuff, he came to the conclusion that the best way to build a road was with little tiny stones, little bits of gravel essentially, set in dirt, compacted over time as things roll over it, with drainage at a slight angle so that water rolls off it, with drainage ditches on both sides. That's this. Now, the good thing about this is that they're relatively cheap to build. You don't need big cut stones for this. Any kind of rock will do. The government, you can hire whole families, little kids. Dad can break the big rocks, mom breaks them when they're smaller. Little kids tap them into little pieces. Get all this gravel, you put it into place. You get road crews, and they lay it out. Once all the gravel and everything's laid in place, as people roll over it over time, it hardens and gets solid, almost like cement or something like that, to where the road is very stable, it's very flat, which makes it possible to move things along it very, very easily. Carts, troops, whatever you need. Roads connect things. Trying to take a wagon through the woods as opposed to move it along this road, well, the choice is obvious. Now, a lot of these roads are what they're called turnpikes, which means you just have to pay money basically to go on it. They literally have a pike, a beam going across the road. You pay money, the guy lifts it up, and on you go. Now, the first of these roads is what's called the Cumberland Road, which runs, as you can see, all the way from basically Maryland, Pennsylvania, Cumberland, this area right here, all the way over to St. Louis. So what that means is everybody along this route who has access to this road can move their supplies over the Appalachian Mountains back east or toward the Mississippi River. Connects the Mississippi essentially with the East Coast over the Appalachian Mountains. That's good. It's especially good if you own land near the road, because that makes that land really, really valuable. So if you're one of Henry Clay's buddies, and then you get rich. Henry Clay actually has no problem building roads right by his plantations and trying to do that. He's not the most scrupulous user of public money, Henry Clay, but nonetheless does a lot of good. Henry Clay also believes in building canals. Canals, the easiest way to define it is a canal is an artificial waterway. It's like a river, only people make it. One of the biggest, the most important canals built during this period is a canal called the Erie Canal. And the Erie Canal connects Lake Erie with the Hudson River. Why is this important? Well, if you look right here, the main outlet for the Great Lakes is the St. Lawrence River going out this way into Canada. But that doesn't really help you very much if you're America. By building the Erie Canal, you connect Lake Erie, and therefore the Great Lakes region, over this gap right here, over this spot of land right here toward the Hudson River, and then the Hudson River out through New York City. The Erie Canal has a lot of effects. One, it again helps tie that land over the Appalachian Mountains economically and physically, essentially, to the East Coast. New York is on its way now to becoming America's largest, most powerful commercial center, eclipsing Philadelphia and everywhere else, simply because it has access to all this interior market very, very easily. It's much easier to move things over water than it is over land. Ships can be way bigger than wagons can. So if you can ship things over water, you want to do that. If you can move things over the water instead of a road, you want to do that. So by tying the Great Lakes region into the economy in the East Coast, you've now also tied the East Coast to the Mississippi, because of course the Mississippi River, you can sail down south. Anything you're producing here, you can send out to New Orleans and out to the world. Problem with the Mississippi River, though, is that it's easy to sail down the Mississippi. I don't know why I'm pointing over here. Down the Mississippi. The problem is you can't go up the Mississippi. You can be towed up on a barge short distances, but the current is such that you can float down really easily, but you can't really get back up. So you can send stuff out, but you can't bring stuff in. That's until you get the invention of the steamship by a guy named Robert Fulton. Now, Robert Fulton, interesting guy. He's basically an arms merchant. He's a guy, an ironmonger, a guy who makes weapons and sells them, really to whoever. He's an American patriot, but he has no problem pitching his steamship idea to the British, to the French, whoever will buy it, explicitly as a warship to be used to destroy their enemies. A steamship is just like it sounds. It's a ship with a steam engine on it. So instead of sails or oars, it is powered by a wheel, a paddle wheel. The steam engine is hooked up to this kind of circular wheel with kind of flat blades in the middle. And as the steam engine goes, the wheel turns and it pushes the ship through the water. As long as you have water in the boiler and as long as you have something to burn, this ship will keep going. You don't have to wait for the wind. It doesn't get tired like a guy rowing it. It just goes and goes and goes. What's more important for America right here, though, is that it's powerful enough to go up the Mississippi, which means now you've tied this region into much more so to the economy of the rest of the world. You can get tea from China, bring it all the way around the bottom of South America, come back up, sail your steamship up the Mississippi River, and drop that tea off in St. Louis if you so choose. Opens up options for the people here in the interior. They don't have to have a lower standard of living than the people on the coast. The frontier, you have access to the same goods that you have over here. That market revolution, that market economy starts touching everywhere at the same time. In addition to that, starting in the 1820s in Britain, and again, if you had to track down one inventor for this, it'd be kind of hard. But in the 1820s and going into the 1830s in Britain, and we're getting a little bit ahead historically of other things we're going to talk about, but that's what some of the impact of this on overall. The 1820s and 1830s in Britain, you see the development of the railroad, the locomotive. A locomotive is basically like a steamship, except a land version. It's a steam engine applied to a wheeled vehicle, or a vehicle that rolls along tracks, that will allow it to move over land with the same kind of speed and efficiency that a steamboat will go. A railroad is extremely important. For one thing, it eliminates that thousands and thousands and thousands of year old problem of being able to move goods in bulk over land quickly. I mean, the only option really if you want to move something over land is carry it yourself, put it on a horse, or attach some horses or oxen or whatever to a wagon and move it with that. Human or animal power, which is naturally limited, and given the space and everything involved, you can't really, it's very expensive and very time consuming to move stuff over land. With a locomotive, if it's powerful enough, you can attach it to any number of wagons which are also on wheels, boxcars, whatever, and move it across land. As long as you've got something to burn and water to boil, you're good. It'll keep going and going and going. Which means, now, everywhere you can build railroad tracks, and everywhere you can put a locomotive, everywhere you can build these trains, you've attached things physically much, much more tightly than they've ever been before in history. For the first time in human history, it's possible to move physically from place to place, doing this and then doing that over land. Railroads pop up all over Britain, but they pop up all over the United States very, very quickly, and just as importantly, with just as much economic effect. Here's a map, and again, when you get this slide at the end, you'll be able to see all this. Initially, you only have a few railroads in the Northeast. You have railroads eventually spreading out here more in the north, and then gradually over time, rail becomes a major part of transportation throughout the Northeast and the Midwest. Much less so in the South. Why is that so? Well, the Industrial Revolution comes to America very unevenly. The money, the capital, the infrastructure, all of that is available in New England before it's available anywhere else. Samuel Slater, a British industrial engineer, leaves England, sneaks over to America, basically as an act of industrial espionage, comes to Massachusetts, sets up factories. Other people up there set up factories. There's a lot of water for hydraulic power. Oh. One second. All right. Sorry, pardon me. There's water available for. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Hydraulic power for wheels. Sorry. 1 second. Hydraulic power, able to turn wheels, hydro-powered factories as opposed to steam engines, but again, if you get steam engine there, you can build factories anywhere. But the money to build these things, the capital, the interest is really in the Northeast. That's where you start to get the Industrial Revolution in America, that's where you get the factories, that's where you get the railroads. Industrial Revolution comes much later and much more unevenly to the South, and a lot of people in the South don't want the Industrial Revolution. The industrial economy, the market economy, that really changes things in the South enormously. And it will change things in the South enormously, and a lot of people, plantation owners, people who profit from the existing economy, do not want that. So there's a lot of hostility, a lot of animosity toward this idea of banks and industry and all these things coming into the South, mainly because the people in power can see it is a threat to their way of life. Even though, ironically, their own system of slave agriculture, plantation agriculture, is what's fueling the Industrial Revolution. When they start setting up textile mills in the Northeast, that cotton that's being produced by slaves is going up there and fueling the Industrial Revolution up there. The two are tied together. Don't think of them as perfect enemies. But nonetheless, no, the Industrial Revolution, much bigger in the North, and especially the Northeast, than it is in the South. It's not really until after the Civil War that you start getting massive amounts of factories and big infrastructure like that in the South. Now, you get other revolutions as well. And I keep looking down because I want to make sure I'm talking about things in the exact order they're on your sheet, because I think was this time I talked about, yeah. I skipped over market economy. I want to make sure I got everything perfectly. So, please understand also, we're talking about Industrial Revolution, factories and all that. America is still primarily an agricultural society and will remain so into the 20th century. 90% of people are farmers. Farming is very labor intensive. When your wheat's being harvested, okay, you're out there in the middle of Indiana. You're planting all this wheat, it's time to harvest it. Well, you got to hire people to harvest it for you. But your wheat's ripening at the same time as everybody else's, which means that there's a limited supply of labor you can hire, which means the price of labor goes way, way up, which means it's expensive, which means that you can only plant so much wheat because anything you can't hire somebody to harvest is going to die on the stalk. When the Industrial Revolution hits agriculture, that's when you see the profound changes in America shifting from an agricultural society to an industrial society. The McCormick Reaper, for example. Cyrus McCormick, 1837, invents this. It basically looks like a big paddle wheel, essentially, being pulled by horses. And what it does is just sort of knocks down the wheat so it can be scooped up into this kind of little rake-looking thing right here. Later on, people invent machines that not only harvest the wheat, but also what's called thresh the wheat, which is I don't know if you know this, wheat comes in a little shell. You actually have to pound it to break it open to get the wheat out. A machine that pounds it to get the wheat out, and then a machine that winnows it. It blows the shell away, leaving just the wheat grains behind. When you get all three of those together, it's called a combine. So once you get these combines, and these initial combines are pulled by horses, later on though they become steam powered. Once you get these, it becomes possible to plant and harvest much, much more than you were before. Cuts way down on the labor. So when you don't need all these laborers anymore, where do those guys go? Well, they move out of the countryside into the cities and go to work in factories. The big transition, this process of urbanization we're going to talk about, especially with the second Industrial Revolution. starts getting going here. Really doesn't take off until after the Civil War, but this is the start of it. And last but not least, I want to talk about a revolution in communications. Samuel Morse is among other things, a painter, an artist, and an inventor. And Samuel Morse is interested in electricity, and he's interested in this idea of using electric circuits for communication. This is a little machine, this is called a telegraph. This is what he ended up coming up with. A telegraph basically works by creating and interrupting an electrical current. When you depress this button, the current is broken. When you lift it back up, the current is connected. The current, when it's being fed through the basically electric line, ends up creating a signal on the other end. And the signal is basically a beep like this. But if you interrupt that, you create gaps in it. So you can actually make it beep, 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 like this. And if you work out a system whereby each sequence of beeps corresponds to a letter, you can send messages with this telegraph over any distance you can possibly string wires. So, in other words, you can send a message from New York to Philadelphia, to Atlanta, to eventually San Francisco, to London eventually. They have transatlantic telegraph cables. You can send a message to anywhere on Earth instantaneously, as long as you're on the other end of one of these things. This is a revolution in human communication unprecedented in anywhere. Any other communication involved necessarily time and distance. In other words, if I want to communicate with you, I either have to talk to you face to face, yell towards you. If I can't do that, I have to find some other way to signal you that I'm trying to communicate with you. If you're so far away that we don't have any kind of physical sight contact or sound contact or anything, I have to send a message. I have to write something down or tell someone else. He has to move over a great distance to tell you. That takes time. This is instantaneous. With instantaneous communication from place to place, as long as you have telegraph wires, you can communicate anywhere in the world. News moves faster. Information moves faster. You know what's happening on the other side of the world. That helps you coordinate your business better. Being able to coordinate your business better means more money, which means more investment in technology, which means everything keeps going. America during this period gets wealthier and wealthier and wealthier as the market economy takes ever greater hold. It changes society in profound ways. We're going to see that as we move along. One thing it changes enormously is the economy, and especially in the Northeast, we shifted factories and stuff like that. And you start to see this pulling apart of North and South based on these two divergent economic interests, which we will talk about as we move into going into the Civil War, Manifest Destiny, and all that. So, that was the market revolution. I hope I made everything clear for you. I hope you understand. I know market revolution was kind of snuck in there and kind of in the middle, but just move it back and you'll be good. So, I hope you all enjoyed market revolution. Like I said, I hope you found it informative. Like I say in every lecture, I look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you all for working so hard. I'm always happy every time I come down there. Thank you very much, Miss Hahn and Miss McCall. And I hope that, like I said, I get down there soon to see you. Until next time, guys, I'll talk to you later. It's Mr. Moomaw signing off.